Well, hello. We're about 2 or 3 minutes here from the start of our Q&A session with Professor David Merrill today. And welcome all of you to our webinar. We're going to wait a few minutes before we get kicked off, but glad to have you here. And of course, today's session is a Q&A, so we'll be heavily using the chat feature here in Zoom. So if you have questions that you'd like to ask of David Merrill, no reason not to start adding those in now.
It comes up with Chrissy's name on it. Is that the...
Yes, I cloned myself because I just couldn't miss this.
That's funny.
All right, it appears that when I had shared the link on LinkedIn, it actually shared my name. So you might see a few Chrissy Jacksons in the audience. I apologize for that. Sometimes you just need to have your coffee before you go on social media, I suppose.
That's great. I haven't never seen that before, and glad to know that it's possible.
But it's
Happy
also,
to be a trailblazer.
it's also possible for any participant to go in and change their name
Yes, that's right.
while we're viewing. There's Renat. I recognize Renat.
Yeah, and of course the trick there is to just hover over yourself, and there are 3 little blue dots that you can click on, and you can edit your profile picture or give yourself, rename yourself if you'd like. All right, well, it is 11 o'clock, and I can see more people are continuing to trickle in, and that's great. But let's get started with our introductions today, since we have just a half hour. I am Christopher Allen. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Allen Interactions, and really pleased to be a part of the Allen Academy. And today we've got a wonderful session here lined up with Professor David Merrill to do a little Q&A. And so we'll be on for the next half hour. If you have questions, of course, we're gonna take those from the audience. We've got a number that came in beforehand, and so we're gonna run through those first, and hope to make today's sessions really interactive. Okay, so just a little housekeeping. If you're hoping to ask a question, we'd love for you to use the Q&A chat panel. And as you're hopping on today, let us know where you're calling in from. And of course, let all the attendees know where you're calling in from. I think that's kind of fun. And to do that, make sure that you select all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your question and responses. Of course, during the session, we're recording today, and we're going to be taking some questions from the audience as we get towards the end. If we're coming up with too many questions for the time allotted, we'll circle back with a blog and answer some of those questions and leave them up on the Allen Academy site for you to take a look at. And then kind of before we get too far along, I know that we're running a contest today, and Chrissy Jackson from the Allen Academy is here. Chrissy, can you explain a little bit more about how that's going to work?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I am the real Chrissy Jackson, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about the contest that we have running for the first Principles of Instruction. So everyone who is attending our live session today will be entered in a drawing for one of 2 prizes. We have 2 prizes that will be a copy of Dr. Merrill's First Principles of Instruction revised edition, physical copy of the book. And we will have 1 grand prize winner who will win a free seat in our First Principles of Instruction lecture series, which is starting on May 24th, I'm sorry. Again, drink coffee before you open your mouth. looking forward to this event and glad you're all here.
Awesome. And we've got a real international audience today. This is so fantastic. We've got folks from Tel Aviv, from India, from Hungary, Florida, Tennessee, Minneapolis, Sacramento. This is terrific. Glad to be connecting virtually with everybody across the globe as we get rolling. All right. So, David Merrill is an absolute legend in our field, and I'm so excited to have him as part of the Allen Academy. His works, I think, as we'll be discussing today, from first principles as well as his work back at the University of Illinois, really has changed and shaped our field in a pretty significant way. Having the opportunity to connect with David, to learn more about first principles of instruction, how that's been shaping the industry even as of late, and we're so excited to have the reintroduction and the revised version of first principles of instruction covered in the Academy. And so we'll be digging into that today. Just a quick little bit of housekeeping about the Allen Academy and maybe what makes us different. Our faculty members and internal team at Allen Interactions really got together and said, it's time to do something different to help support our field. There are a lot of places that you can go for workshops and to get some experience with new tools or new principles, but they tend to be delivered over a very short period of time and don't give students enough time to really practice and see the fruits of their labor being implemented in real work. And that's one of the things that we're so terribly excited to have David's help with. And to get right into it, David's offering two courses on first principles of instruction, a lecture series and a studio series. And David, can you talk a little bit about the differences between these two offerings and what students would expect if they enrolled in one or both?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't like to lecture, and so when they asked me if I would do a lecture series, I said okay. And so the lecture series will be pretty interactive, but it will be a lecture series. That is, it's tell and show, and I'm going to emphasize tell, show, do. And so I said because I emphasize tell, show, do. That's my mantra. I said I want to have a do. And so Allen Academy said, okay, let's set up a studio class. Now, a studio class comes from the idea of an artist. If you've ever taken an art class, sometimes you're in a studio and you're making a drawing or doing something, and the teacher oftentimes will walk around, look at your work, make some comments, give you some suggestions, maybe even take a brush and add a stroke. And so that's the whole idea of the studio class, to have you actually create a piece of instruction. And in many cases in the past, that people have used a course that they're actually working on in their business. And then for me to go and look at that and make suggestions. So the recommendation is, and if you take the studio class, you get the lecture class as well. I believe, is that right, Chris? Yes.
Yes.
So that's the difference. One is tell and show, the other is tell, show, and do.
Awesome. And, kind of before we move into the questions that have been pre-submitted, talk a little bit about, the revised version of your text and what's the inspiration and how you might.
The inspiration was very interesting because Wiley was publishing the text, and I got a note from Wiley that they quit listing it in their catalog. And I said, wait, I don't want to do this. And I was at the ACT convention, not this last virtual one, the one before that was in Vegas. And I was complaining, or people were out saying, we really want to use first principles. And I said, are you able to get the book? And we looked online and they couldn't find it. And I said, that's really pretty frustrating. And somebody said, oh, talk to Phil Harris. ACT will publish it for you. So I went and talked to Phil and he said, oh yeah, great, we'll publish it. So we got the rights back, and then Phil said, we need to make about a 10% change to get a new copyright. And so signed me an editor, phenomenal lady, was the best I've ever worked with. And we got discussing it, and so we made a few changes, about 90%. change. And so basically it's all the same ideas, but presented in quite a different way, much more condensed, much more straightforward. I think in my first book, I tried to put everything I knew about instruction into one book. In this book, I really tried to focus on first principles of instruction and how to apply them. And so it's a different book, but it's the same basic ideas.
And you've had a couple, we've certainly run this series before, and you've gotten an opportunity to work with a handful of students working at all sorts of different organizations and diving into the new text and going through the studio series. But what's been your take on how first principles is being applied today, and what modern instructional designers are interested in the framework to help their designs?
Well, I think the basic thing here is that I called it first principles because I did not see this as an alternative model for instruction. I saw this as a set of principles that had to be under any kind of instructional method that you used if people are going to learn. So from my point of view, it's really an attempt to identify those things that are necessary for instruction to be effective, efficient, and engaging. But in the process, you can't just talk about principles in general. I wrote an article on the first principles. Even that was just not, it was even a little more elaborated than that, because you have to implement them. And principles can be implemented in lots of different ways. So what I tried to do in my book on first principles was to say, here are the principles, and here's my take on how I would implement these principles. And in fact, some of these implementations are extensions of the principles themselves. They're really corollaries to the principles. And so I do not think this is an alternative presentation. If anybody is using any instructional design theory, I think that they can still look at them in terms of the first principle to see to what extent they are present in that theory, in that method, in that approach. And to the extent that they are, is the extent to which that instruction will be effective. The first principles are now been used around the world. I just got word this morning that the new version of first principles is now available in Chinese, or will be very shortly. The first book was also published in Korea. If you go on the internet and look at first principles, you can find people who have been using it in amazingly different areas. And I think the reason is because it's not an alternative to what's out there. It's an underlying set of principles for everything that's out there.
Fantastic. And as you've been talking, we've been getting a flood of questions in from the audience. So with that as our primer, let's jump into some of the ones that we've got submitted in advance.
You need to extend the time.
Yeah, probably. So what sets the first principles apart from other modern adult learning theories? Are there any industries or applications in which first principle really excels?
Well, I think I've answered the first question with my introduction.
Yeah.
And the second question, what people ask me, is it appropriate in one area or another? And I've had teachers use first principles. My most exciting teacher, I had a kindergarten teacher signed up for my course, and I thought, oh my gosh, I think this is primarily for adult learning. And she said, no, I think I can make it work. Probably the best course I ever had anybody build. A problem-solving course for 5-year-olds in counting and how to groups. And she actually taught them how to compare groups using basically statistics, but it's very simplified for little tiny kids. And so that's my one extreme. The other extreme is it's been applied in training people to build jet engines. It's been applied in training people in sales. It's been applied in language learning. I think these are basic principles. I think it doesn't matter what the subject matter content is. I think these principles apply in all those areas. And I have been very gratified at the widespread use of these principles. I haven't agreed with all the way they've done it, but yes, I do not think it's limited to a particular academic area.
Thank you for that. Our next question, can you explain the context in which your original ideas were conceived, and then how a change in context, if any, has shaped them into their current form?
Well, in the book, there's a long introduction and a prep forward to the book that will answer that first question, but I'll do it in a couple of sentences. When I was in grad school, B.F. Skinner came and talked, and he said that somebody asked him a question about what he wrote, and he said, in my book, you said blah, blah, blah. Tonight, you said blah, blah, blah. It seemed to be a contradiction. And Skinner said, hell, do you think I believe everything I ever wrote? Well, for me, that was a great thing. All of a sudden, I said, wait a minute, you can change your mind. That was the first big thing. The second thing he said changed my life. He said, what I tried to do is make as few assumptions as I could about human learning and see how much learning I could expect. And I thought, important things can be done with just a few ideas. My father was a landscape painter, and I learned as an artist, you can paint anything you want with 3 colors, red, yellow, and blue. And so that idea and the idea of Skinner made me say, I wonder if we can build an instructional theory with just a few principles. So that the first theory version was called component display theory, and it had just a few principles. And so for me, those few principles are basically summed up in 3 words: tell, show, do. But the elaboration of those is what's important. And as time has gone on, they have been very rigorous. Obviously, there have been some changes. I think at some point in time, I realized that learner interaction with each other, student learning interaction, I added that kind of to the theory. The original version of the theory did not have problem base as the problem is the center. And so the problem centered was added to kind of accommodate lots of the findings that have been found in those areas. So it continues to adapt. And my goal right now, I'm old. So my goal is to get other people interested and to do work on it. And there are a number of people now who are doing research on various aspects of first principles, for which I'm very grateful.
All right. Our next question here talks a little bit about modern authoring tools and asks the question, have the tools that are available to instructional designers made it easier or harder, in your opinion, to create fundamentally sound learning experiences?
Yes and no. I'm sorry about that phone. I started just ringing my doorbell, and it rings back and forth until they finally go away. Okay. I think there's an independence between principles of learning and the way you implement those. I'll tell an interesting story about that. Erwin Goodman and I, many years ago, we wrote a little book called Instructional Strategies in Media. And we went and presented it at a special conference that ACT had scheduled. And it was kind of a tough time for me. It was early in my career. And here this whole conference was looking at one paper little book that we had written and critiquing it. And so it was a little bit intimidating. At the very end, we had a discussion, and they said, okay, after all this discussion, what is your theory of media selection? And I said the following, again, talking to school people, I said, somewhere you have a media closet. My theory is this: you walk down the hall, you put a blindfold on, you open the door, and you grab whatever's there, and you pull it out, and you use it to create effective instruction. The answer to the question is, I do not think it matters how you deliver the instruction. I think that if you use virtual reality, if you use all these phenomenally wonderful new technologies, and you don't implement the basic principles of instruction, they're not going to work. The technology themselves is not the solution. It's a truck. And if the truck doesn't have the right content in it, and you empty out the truck, a garbage truck, you still have garbage.
It's a great answer. Another question here from Lindsay, stating that she's tasked with updating a bunch of older e-learning courses. Is it possible to take, that old stuff that might not be great and start to add in the first principles into that course, or should somebody start from scratch?
My favorite question that I saw you gave me earlier, and yes, uh, in the new book on first principles, I talk about some levels. It seems to me that the first principle that you need to apply is show. I think I wrote the word show on more student papers than any other word. Show me, show me, show me, show me. We just do not demonstrate enough. Kindergarten teachers are great. College professors are absolutely lousy. And so it seems to me that, so then the first one is show me. The second one is let me do it. And the third one is let me solve problems. And then there's two other principles that also facilitate, but those three are pretty essential. So if I have some existing instruction, somebody says, look at my course, look at my syllabus. What do you, we've also found ways, by the way, to evaluate syllabi with this. And there's a paper on that out there somewhere. And so I say, look at my course. The very first thing I look at is to see if they have adequate examples, to see if they have adequate show me. And most of the time, I find, no, you can improve this course if you do one thing, add really good hands-on examples that you show people what you mean and how you're doing it. The second thing is, if that's there, you say, oh, okay, that's good. If they have that, then the next thing I want to do is to say, do you have exercises that allow people to do it, to actually perform it? Not answer multiple choice questions. That's not what doing is all about. To do it, hands-on, do what you have to do. If you just do those two things, your course is going to be much, much better. It's going to be more effective, efficient, and engaging. And then if you really can get carried away and you can turn it into a problem-centered course where people are solving problems, which is another big step, then you really got effective instruction. And the affect side of, the three things that I always talk about, the three E's, effective, engaging, and efficient, the engaging goes way up if you use a problem-centered approach. So absolutely, I think it's a good way to do is to say, give me an existing course, and then let's see if we can upgrade it, fix it, make it better.
Terrific. I'm glad we had this question included. I'm going to start reading through the chat here and pick out a couple more. We've got an attendee asking, how well do you think the levels of instruction model accommodates the latest evidence for cognitive and social psychological factors in learning? And would you adjust the levels in any way to account for these, or are the insights that run parallel to the levels model?
I had the opposite effect, the opposite reaction. As I see more and more cognitive work done, more and more psychology, and I'm not up on all of it. I'm retired. I don't sit and read journals like I used to. So I may be a little behind, but most of what I've seen has basically verified that these principles are important. And they were based, initially on looking at the literature and on what people had said in the literature of applying things. I think the very best researcher on this is Richard Mayer of Santa Barbara, written a book called Multimedia, which I highly recommend to everybody. The best instructional strategies in the world are in there. And I wrote a paper some time back, taking the principles that he had in his book and that Ruth Clark and he did in an adaptation of his book, an everyday reader of his book, and pointed out that these were the same principles we're talking about. The wording is sometimes a little bit different, but what I'm seeing is that the more research that's done, the more it's verifying what these principles are, that some came from research, but a lot of them came from practice, from everyday thinking. And the longer I've dealt with them, the more people I've talked to, the more I'm convinced that these really are the first principles of instruction.
Got another set of really great questions here coming in through chat. What are promising activation strategies to use when learners have deeply held misconceptions? And kind of a follow-up to that, does the levels of instruction model apply similarly to people who lack prior knowledge as to those who must undergo a significant conceptual change?
Well, these are tough. These are tougher questions. Questions because the principle is simple. The application of the principle is sometimes really tough. And I think what we've advocated in my application in the new version of First Principles is providing some kind of a structure is one way to kind of, if somebody does not have, if you can't find a mental model they already have that you can use to build on, then sometimes you can provide a structure from the real world, something they should be familiar with. This is kind of David Ausubel's advanced organizer idea, for those that are familiar with that literature. But the idea is that provide some kind of a structure. Now that structure could be an analogy, it could be an outline, it can be a lot of different things. That's one way to do it, but it's not the only way. Activating, another way that people have been very effective is to get kids to share with each other, so you have a little interaction and you say what they already know about whatever you're talking about. What experience have you had? And they share with each other and then discuss, as an instructor, discuss what's appropriate there, what's not, to kind of get people thinking about where it is. But activation is a way to really make the instruction much better. But activation, if you don't follow up with tell, show, do, activation doesn't really get you there either. But I agree that it takes some imagination. I suppose that's one of the areas, well, the two areas that are most difficult for people to apply First Principles. The number one is finding problem. If you're trying to make it problem-centered, convince yourself that you have a problem. Too many instructors have talked about their course, not in the sense of how to solve problems, but just in some sense. And my attitude is, if you're not teaching people how to solve some kind of a problem or do some kind of a task, why are you teaching the course? And that's the first most difficult. Then I think some of the other more difficult things are finding adequate examples. Sometimes it's challenging to find adequate examples, or sometimes really good examples. In my last course, a woman was dealing with trying to train volunteer firefighters. Well, she had great ideas about what to show, but creating those examples was a bit of a challenge. How do you get the photographs you need in a real fire? Because when they're fighting a real fire, you don't have time to stop and take a picture. And so, so those are some challenges. And activation is another one. It's not too hard to find out sort of where people are, but it's really challenging. As I think the question said, if they have a big misconception, then it's really challenging to find a way to get what they already know so they can relate the new stuff to that in a way that doesn't perpetuate the misconception. That's a very good question, and there isn't a simple answer.
Yeah. A follow-up kind of on some of the things you touched just there in that answer from Nicole, stating, we keep using discussion forums and online classes to encourage peer-to-peer interaction. However, many designs of discussion forums are not leading to higher levels of knowledge construction. Do you think peer-to-peer interaction in discussion forums is important enough to continue trying to redesign learning with this kind of tool, or should we move on to something completely different?
There are two kinds of interaction that teaches and interaction that's a waste of time. Most of it's in that second category. When you start counting how many entries did people make, we're forcing everybody to make a comment. This is nonsense. The only kind of interaction that really pays off is to have people in a group try to solve a problem. So the solution that I found to this is, first of all, we're trying to use a problem-centered course. So I'm trying to teach people how to solve some kind of specific problem and what's necessary to do that. And one of the tasks then in that is to assign people into groups and have each of them learn to solve a problem. Now, I also found that one problem for the group as a group means that somebody gets their problem solved and two people don't. So I always tell them, I want each of you to solve your own problem. But as a group, I'm going to give you a grade on the basis of how the whole group does, how each of the problems in the whole group comes out. So I want you to interact with one another, critique, suggest, discuss each person's problem so that the three of you can realize that each of us have the best solution that we could possibly create. That kind of interaction, if it's done on the internet, and a lot of courses I teach now are online, that is very effective student interaction. And so that's the kind of thing I think. So basically, the short answer is, if people work together to solve problems, it's effective interaction. If they work together to discuss what the teacher said, to pose questions, to revive, read chapters and report them to the class, and the kind of dumb things we do, those are not very effective student interactions. I don't think those student interactions at all. There's more detail to that. I mean, that's a more complex question as well, but that's basically.
I'm going to try to summarize a couple of extra questions that have just come in. And, there's some question here about making asynchronous content, and I assume this is digital instruction, really engaging. And do you have any tips for getting a single student who might be online really engrossed in the topic?
I'm going to answer that question a little different ways. People have often asked me, why don't you have a motivation principle? And I say, because motivation is not something I can do as a designer. Motivation is an outcome, not a design task. And creating video, creating games, we have all these funny things we do to create motivation, I don't think result in motivation. I think motivation comes from learning. We are motivated by the things we learn how to do. You look at your own life. I was a terrible young little guy, and so sports just was not my thing because I was on the last shag of the girls' team growing up. That means, you played right field, never got to go to bat. And so for me, sports was not very interesting, and I'm not very motivated about sports, and I can force myself to watch half of a football game. But on the other hand, somewhere along the line, somebody introduced me to scale model trains. How do you build trains that look like the real thing? And I had a Lionel train like a lot of kids, but I started at 16 or 17 to try to build models that I could take photos of that people wouldn't know were models. And I got pretty good at it. And the better I got at it, the more motivated I am. To the point where right now in the upstairs room of my house, I have a 700 square foot room that is filled with a big giant model railroad that looks like a real world. And so I'm good at that. And my motivation is there because I'm good at it. I love to have my open houses where people come and say, oh, wow, whoa, whoa. Very, very rewarding, okay? So for me, it seems like the answer to the question is, if you do effective instruction, that is, if you tell, show, do, if you implement these principles, motivation will follow. You don't have to create the motivation artificially.
Well, we've hit the end of our half-hour time limit here for questions and answers. And there's
May I make one comment then?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sign up for the lecture course, because I guarantee you in every lecture course, part of that time will be the very thing we're doing here. We'll present some information, but I always end with question and answer and some of the best discussions we've had, because there you're not only going to hear from me, you're going to hear from the other participants in the class, and they all share their knowledge, and that is a good use of learner interaction as well.
Fantastic. So we've got, on the screen, there's two options to jump into the lecture series here this summer. The first one starting on May 24th, so starting here pretty quick. And the second offering starting on July 26th. And then we've got the studio and mentorship model running starting on August 11th. And of course, both of those are available through the Allen Academy, and we'd certainly love to have you attend. For those who submitted questions that we just didn't get to here in time today, we'll record those and start putting some answers together for you, available on the Allen Academy site. And with that, I'd like to thank you for coming today. There's, of course, lots of great programming coming up this summer and fall from the Allen Academy. We certainly encourage you to check out all of those opportunities. We're also proud to offer digital credentials through Credly, so that you can prove your work and that you've gone through these experiences. And with
thank all of you who came today, and I appreciate that support. Little did I realize when I was a young man that people would recognize me around the world, and I am very greatly humbled and appreciate those who express interest in our work. And I hope to see you in one of our courses.
Thank you very much, David. Really appreciate it, and wish everybody a wonderful afternoon.